John's house wasn't very remarkable by any means. It was small, rectangular, and made of bricks. The house stood alone upon a slight rise facing the rest of the village. It was a quiet village, sitting in a quiet corner of the quiet countryside. There wasn't much in the village, just John's friends and family, a few pubs, the overcrowded post office, the local doctor's surgery, a recently opened travel agent's, and a market. John was by no means anything special. Mid-30s, maybe a smidge older, and at least a little bit out of shape. He was in a somewhat happy, if not sparkless marriage to Georgia, who was once the rather beautiful woman he'd met on a night out. Now just a woman he shares a bed and 2 children with. These children were a rather boisterous lad named Joe, and a rather mellow bookish boy named James. Or maybe it was the other way around. John often got those names mixed up. John was sitting at his kitchen table, which wasn't especially unique, except for the fact he was trying to book a flight for him, Georgia, Joe, and or James, whichever one was which. After many summers of saving up and maybe next year's, he hoped to finally go abroad. He had all the necessary documents spread out before him. He only needed now to call the travel agents. He flipped through the phone book. This was the kind of a small village that still had a phone book in the 21st century, until he found the travel agent's phone number. John was hoping for Ibiza. He'd never been to Ibiza. Georgia had been. She said it was lovely. Everyone who'd been said the same. John felt rather left out because he couldn't say without having been. So he dialed away and was swiftly met by the robotic voice of an automated answering machine. It had a strangely enthusiastic voice, not like Georgia. She had lost the majority of her happiness about her marriage with John many years ago. Now just a routine too tired to break. But this voice was different. It was happy to speak to him.
"Hello,"
said the voice.
"You are calling the village travel agency. If you are calling to cancel a booking, press 1. If you are calling to book a flight, press 2.
John didn't need to hear any more. He quickly pressed 2, knowing that to be his answer.
"You have selected to book a flight,"
said the voice in more robotic tone than previously used.
"Please state your preferred destination."
Ibiza, said John, unsure as to why he had to think about it.
"You have chosen Ibiza as your destination,"
the voice said.
"Please hold while we transfer you to a member of staff."
Soon after saying this, the voice was replaced by a rather pleasant melody. John began to wait. Shouldn't take too long, he optimistically thought, and the tone continued. First for 5 minutes, then 10, then 20, then an hour. He would have considered hanging up if not for the reassuring voice saying,
"Please remain on the line. Your call is important to us."
And of course, John felt as though he hadn't been important to anyone before. Not really. So of course, he waited. Then the hours went by, from 1 to 2 and so on. The day rolled by, but he waited, while the voice kept promising the end to the wait that John had hoped would come soon. As he waited, his boys became men. John was on hold when Joe met Mason, and he was on hold when James met Ruby. John was on hold when Joe and Mason were married. He was on hold when James and Ruby had their son, who they named after John, who was none the wiser due to being on hold. He was even on hold when Georgia passed away, and as his village evolved and became a town with more tourists and Starbucks, he sat there on hold, wondering when he'd be taken off hold. One day, many decades later, John sat, his hair long and grey, at the same kitchen table he had sat at all those years ago. His hands and face had been ravished by the years, and he hadn't eaten much, so he looked as frail as he felt. But then suddenly, as though his prayers had been answered, he heard a voice that was not the robotic answering machine, but the voice of a young man asking for details on John's booking. But after all this time waiting, John forgot all about Ibiza.
You've been listening to Hold, written by Cal Burns, performed by Jamie Jackson.